today. Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia, daf Tzadik Tes, and we're going to start from the Mishnah on daf Tzadik Ches Amid Beis. Pardon me. The Mishnah begins, Hashoyel es a para, someone who borrows a cow, V'shilcha loy, and the lender sends the cow, biyad benoi, biyad avdoi, biyad shluchai. The lender says, okay, he gets the phone call that his friend wants to borrow a cow, so he says to his son or his slave, or he sends a messenger to go bring the cow to the borrower. Oy biyad benoi or biyad avda biyad shluchai shel shoyel. Or the borrower sent his own son to pick up the cow, or his own slave to pick up the cow, or his own messenger to pick up the cow. Umesa, and it died before it reached the possession of the borrower. Now, normally a borrower pays if the animal dies, but here the borrower never took possession of the animal. So therefore, the Mishnah says potter. The borrower is exempt from paying. Now, here's the second case. Amaloi hashoyel. But if the borrower says, Shalcho li biyad bini, biyad avdi, biyad shluchi, biyad bincha, biyad avdecha, biyad shluchacha. If the borrower says, I'm borrowing your cow, and send it with your son, your slave, your shliach, your messenger, or give it to my son, my slave, and my messenger. So the shoyel, the borrower, says, I want to take possession as soon as you give it over to my designated person. Or she'amaloi hamajhov, the lender says, Hareini mishalach lecha, I'm sending you the cow, biyad beni, with my son, biyad avdi, my slave, biyad shluchi, my messenger, biyad bincha, biyad avdecha, biyad shluchacha, or with your son, your slave, your messenger. And this is what the lender said to the borrower. V'amaloi hashoyel, and the shoyel says, I agree with that. Shalech, send it. So then v'shilcha, and then the lender sent the cow, umesa, and the cow just died on the road before the borrower took possessions. The din is chayiv. In this case, he's held liable. Why? Because when he said to the lender, you send it into the hand of the messenger, so he's giving right to the messenger to act as his intermediary, into his designated person, and it's almost as if he did take possession of the animal, and therefore he's held liable if it dies by itself. And also, you have to take into account when the borrower is returning the animal to the lender. As long as you don't return the animal to the lender, the borrower is still held responsible. But if the lender said, hey, you can give it to my son, you can give it to my messenger, so then as soon as the borrower gives it over to the messenger, he's no more liable with whatever is going to happen to the animal. So that's the Mishnah. Now we begin the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah, if the borrower said to the lender, send the cow with your slave. Okay, send the cow with your slave, and the lenders agreed and sent the cow with the slave. And while the slave was bringing the cow to the borrower, it died. The borrower is held liable. So the Gemara says, why is that true? Why is that true? Biyad avdoi chayev. If you send it in the hand of the borrower, if the hand of the slave, is the borrower held liable if it dies on the road? It never left the possession of the lender, because yad eved ki yad rabbi. The hand of a slave is almost like the hand of the owner, and therefore, in order for a borrower to be held liable, at the very least, the animal has to leave the possession of the lender. And if it's the slave of the lender holding on to the animal, it's almost as if the owner is holding on to the animal. So why is it that the borrower is held liable if the animal will die on the road? Answers the Gemara. Amar Shmuel says like this: Be'eved ivri deloy kanele gufay. Shmuel says, yes, the only time you say the slave of the slave hand is an extension of the slave of the master is only by an eved kanani, a goyish slave, where you actually own the body of the slave. But a Jewish slave, if you have a Jewish slave, it's like a worker. So it's really not the owner. It's not an extension of the owner. The loy kanele gufe. He doesn't acquire. He doesn't own the body, and therefore, as soon as the lender gives it over to his eved ivri, it's left the lender's domain, and therefore the borrower can be held liable to whatever happens as in the while it's being held on by the slave, the Jewish slave. Rav says, you could even say that it's talking about a goyish slave, but that means that it's almost like the borrower said to the lender, don't send it in the. He didn't say specifically send it in the hand of the slave. He said whack it with a stick and let it come to me. And while he said that, the slave took a hold and was bringing it over to the borrower. Oh, so if you said that, then the slave was not part of the deal over here. He just happens to be holding on to it. But really, as soon as basically the borrower said to the lender, just whack the animal with a stick and it should come by itself, he's basically saying, no matter what's happening, as long as you're not holding on to the animal, I'm taking responsibility. And therefore, even if the slave that's holding on to the animal is the Evet Kanani, it's the borrower who took total responsibility to whatever is going to happen to this animal. So says the Gemara, Meisvei, I'll have you a question. Here in this brisa, it says, Ashoyel Apara, someone who borrows a cow, and the borrower sent the animal with the hand through his son or through his messenger. So the lender sent the animal via his son or the messenger, and the borrower requested that. So chayev, then the borrower is liable to whatever happens to the animal because he requested, send the animal with your son and your messenger. But if the borrower said, send the animal with your slave, so then potter, the borrower will be held not responsible. Not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said you are responsible. So now you have a contradiction between our Mishnah and the Brisa. So Bishlam Shmuel, according to Shmuel, everything makes perfect sense. Mas Nisim be'evet Ivri. Our Mishnah is talking about an Evet Ivri. Brisa be'evet Kanani. The Brisa is talking about an Evet Kanani. Our Mishnah is talking about an Evet Ivri, and therefore, as soon as the lender gives it over to the Jewish slave, it left his domain. Therefore, the borrower is held responsible. The brisa that we just mentioned, is talking about an Evet Kanani. So it's really the lender gave it over to his Evet Kanani, which is basically an extension arm of his own arm, and it never left the domain of the lender, and therefore, this why is the brisa says that the borrower is not held liable. El Rav Kashya, but Rav, it remains difficult because Rav said our Mishnah is also talking about an Evet Kanani, and the Brisa is talking about an Evet Kanani. So what should be the difference between the Brisa and the Mishnah? Amalach Rav says our Mishnah is talking about loy tema nasak amalei, that our Mishnah is not it's as if you said, hit it with a stick and the animal should come. Elaema, our Mishnah means to say, but amalei, he actually did say that. Hikisha b'makal b'hitava. The borrower said, hit the animal with a stick and it should come by itself. There, and the Brisa, he didn't say anything. So if in our Mishnah, when he said to the borrower, said to the lender, hit it with a stick and the animal should come to me, he's basically saying, I'm taking responsibility to this animal right away. Even though you own the animal, it could be in your domain. I'm responsible for whatever happens to the animal. And so therefore, it doesn't matter if the lender's slave is holding on to the animal, it's the borrower who took verbal responsibility for this animal. And he actually said it. The itmar, and the itmar, because you have to say it. The itmar, hishilani parascha, the guy said, lend me your cow. V'amalei, and the lender said, biyad me, who should I send my cow to you? V'amalei, and the borrower said, hikisha b'makal v'tovei, I'm telling you, hit it with a stick and let it come to my house. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Abahu, Amar Rav, kivin shiyasum retrusa mashal, as soon as the lender, like, it walks out of the door of the lender's house, umesin, it dies, chayiv yechayiv, the borrower is held responsible. And name a Messiah. The Brisa actually agrees with Rav that if you actually say it, then the borrower takes full responsibility of the animal as soon as it leaves the domain of the lender, even if somebody else is holding on to the animal, could be his Evet Kanani, it doesn't matter. Once you say the word Hikisha B'makel, if he tavai, hit it and send it to me, then the borrower is assuming all responsibility. Hishilim,
Baruch, one question. Quick
yeah,
question.
yeah, sure.
If the Evetani just assumed that it was belongs to the borrower, brought it to him, and the borrower says, "I'll accept it." So then, obviously, it's the borrower's in the borrower's domain now.
The Evet Kanani belongs to the lender,
With,
right?
in
So
other words, the Evetani without the borrower didn't say, "Hit it with a stick and bring it to me." The Evetani did it himself, brought it to the borrower.
then the
Who
borrower
would
is
it
not
belong
held
to?
liable.
It would belong.
No, because that
Okay.
would be considered as, imagine the lender is holding on to the animal, bringing it to the borrower, and the animal dies.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
so you wouldn't hold the borrower responsible. So if the
Right.
slave, the goyish slave, which is basically an extension of the borrower of the lender, it's almost as if it's almost as if the lender is bringing the animal to the.
I see. Yes, understood.
I always
Okay.
said in a spiritual way, we are considered slaves of God. Basically, that's the Kabbalah Torah was that we have no free will. Our free will is basically to serve God. So
Hmm.
basically, we are an extension, like Yad Avda, Yad Evek, Yad Rabbi, as you can see, that we're an extension of God, and we could work our own miracles by as long as you work on being a slave of Hashem, you're basically an extension of Hashem, and therefore
Right.
you're godly like.
Yeah.
Anyway, name him
Okay.
Messiah. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: name him Messiah. Hishlani perascha v'amale biyadmi. The borrower said, "Lend me your cow," and the lender says, "Who should I send it?" V'amale kisha b'makabi tavoy kivin shiyarshim mishush mashal meisachayv. So if the borrower said, "Just hit it with a stick, let it walk on its own," as soon as it leaves the domain of the lender and it dies, chayv, he's liable. So that's you would think that it works in all situations. Amar Avashi, not so. Hachabamayaskinen, it doesn't work in all situations. Kigoin, when there's this idea of hikishu b'makal v'hitavoy, is if if you hit the animal, the only where it can go only directly into the borrower's courtyard. How is that possible? Let's say the lender had an outer courtyard. His property is in the outer part of let's say a square, and the inner part of the square belongs to the borrower. So when the borrower says hit it with a stick, and so it's the only way it could go right into the middle, right into the borrower's domain. So only in that situation would hikisha b'makal v'hitavoy work, because since by the borrower saying hit it with a stick, he's basically saying there's no other place where the animal could go. It's definitely can go into my domain. That's how you can take responsibility. But if it's not guaranteed that the animal, by hitting it with a stick, will walk into the borrower's domain, maybe it'll walk to somebody else's domain, then the borrower may not be held liable. So that's what the Gemara says. When if the borrower's domain is surrounded by the lender's domain, it's for sure going to get there. It's for sure the animal is going to get into the borrower's domain, and therefore only in that case will the borrower be held liable. Ihochi, says the Gemara, Maila Memra. What's the novelty of that? If of course he's responsible, because he said, send it to the animal to me, and the animal has nowhere else to go but to the borrower's domain. That really there is like corners where it's not necessarily guaranteed 90% it's going into borrower's domain, but there's like, let's say, one corner that belongs to public property. So maybe the animal is going to go to that corner and not come into the borrower's domain. So maybe the borrower is not fully committed taking responsibility because he doesn't know for sure the animal's going to end up in his property. So the same I would have thought loy samchadati. He's not committed to take responsibility. Maybe the animal's going to get stuck in the corner and never come into his domain. So he's not fully committed to taking responsibility for this animal. It comes to teach you that he really is committed to take responsibility for the animal. Okay. Du Gemara. Rav Huna said, Hashoyel karda mechaber, someone who borrows an axe from his friend. Baka boy, if the guy chopped with the axe, so imagine you lend your friend an axe. As soon as he starts chopping with the axe, then the borrower takes responsibility. Loy baka boy, but if he didn't start chopping with the axe, loy then he didn't take responsibility. So the Gemara doesn't understand that. Lamai, why? To take responsibility for the axe, who says he has to use it right away? Perhaps you borrowed an axe and you want to use it a week later. So why shouldn't you take responsibility as soon as you take possession? Why you buy a cow? You say as soon as the cow walks into your property as a borrower, you're held liable. So why should an axe be any different? Answers the Gemara a very fascinating thing. El Chazara. The Chazara means that can the lender say, I don't want to lend you the axe anymore? You see, let's say he said, I'm lending you the axe for 30 days. And the lender can change his mind, says, I don't want to lend it to you anymore. So can he back out of the deal that he made? So then it depends. If the borrower, Baka boy, started using the axe, then the lender cannot back out. But if he didn't start using the axe, then the lender could back out. And the reason why that once the borrower started using the axe, we don't allow the lender to back out because that's not fair to the borrower. He's relying on this axe to complete a job, and then you're going to tell him, give me my axe back in the middle of the term, middle of your agreement that you said he could have it for 30 days. So as long as he didn't start working with the axe, then we give the right to the lender to back out. But if the borrower of the axe started chopping with it, then we don't give the right to the lender to back out. Says the Gemara, not everybody agrees with that. Upligid Rabami, the Amar Rabami disagrees. Hamasha kardim shel hegdish, mo'al lefi toifas anabanoy. Rabami said that if someone lends an axe belonging to hegdish, then the guy was oiva mila as he violated using hegdish as soon as the other person took possession of the axe. You have an axe that belongs to Hegdish in your house, and you give it to somebody. As soon as the guy took possession of the axe, even if he didn't use it yet, you are moil. The kedusha of the axe, the holiness of on that axe goes away. And the person who has the axe now could chop with it. Now, but if you say that a person could always back out, the lender could always back out of it as long as the borrower did not start using the axe, amayim. So then why is the lender of an axe belonging to Hegdish violated the Me'ila? That's why he could always back out and say, give me back the axe. I made a mistake. It's Hegdish. And why should the Kedusha go off that the friend can now start using the axe? Let the borrower return the axe, and nothing happened over here. So it comes to see that Rabbi Ami held as soon as you commit to lend an axe to somebody and you give it to him, you can't back out. If you said, I want to lend you the axe for 30 days, you can't go back on your word. And so Rabbi Ami disagreed with Rav Huna. Rab Lazar also disagreed with Rab Huna. Rab Lazar said, Rab Lazar said that just like to acquire something, all you have to do is draw it to you. Like you're buying an animal, even if you didn't pay the money, if you do mashicha to the animal, you draw the animal to you, you acquired it. So also, as soon as you bring something into your possession, even if you are a borrower, that's it. The lender can't back out. So Rab Lazar disagreed also with Rav Huna. Tanya na mihachi with the same brisa. That just like Mashiach works by lekuchos, so Mashiach works by a borrower. That as soon as he takes possession, the borrower takes possession, the lender cannot back out. Kashem, and now the Brisa says, we go to my base. Kashem shekarka niknis bekesem shtar v'chazaka, kach schiris niknis bekesem shtar v'chazaka. The Brisa says that just like a piece of land you can buy with, let's say I want to buy a property, so I could buy it with money. I have a contract, or do chazaka, show ownership of it. Kach schiris, if you rent, the Gemara thinks if you rent, let's say a bicycle, nikne bekesav v'shtar v'chazaka. So the Gemara says, "Chiris maya bidite." How does, if you're renting something, let's say you're renting a bicycle, how do you have kesser shtar chazaka? Chazaka means that you show ownership by putting up a fence around the property. But if you're renting a bicycle, what kind of chazaka is there? Amar Rav Chiv, so Rav Chiv explains, chiris bekarka. It's talking about you, not that you're buying a piece of land, you're renting a piece of land. Renting a piece of land is like buying a piece of land. You buy it and you use kesef to purchase it, or you could use just a plain contract. Or chazaka means you show ownership of it. Let's say you put a fence or you put a door, and that shows ownership. And same thing if you rent a piece of land. Nu Gemara, Omar Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Hi man, the gazel chavitza de tamar mechaber." A guy steals a bunch of dates from his friend. Let's say ispo chamishim tamre. Let's say it had 50 dates in this bunch. So agav hadodi mizdaben. Listen to this. If you sell it all at once, mizdaben in nuchichada, then you sell the bunch of dates for 49. There's 50 dates. You give if you sell it all at once, you give a discount and it's 49. Chada chada mizdaben benun. But if you sell one at a time, you actually get 50 dates, each one $1, so you'll get $50 for it. So now, if you stole it, what should you pay the guy back? Should you pay him back $49 because you stole the whole thing at once, or you pay him back $50 because if he would sell each date at once, he would get $50 for it. So lehedid, if you stole from a plain person, for a hedid, a plain person, you pay 49. Lehedish mishalem chamishim, you would have to pay, if you stole from the base of Migdash, you would have to pay 50. Like an extra 20%, because whenever you steal from Hegdish, you add 20%. So Hegdish, you always go more stricter than if you steal from a plain person. A plain person, you can get away with a more discounted rate, but if you steal from Hegdish, you have to pay the full price. This is only applies by if you steal from Hegdish, because if you damage Hegdish, you don't pay the 20%. When only if you steal from Hegdish, you have to pay the principal plus 20%. But if you just damage something of Hegdish, you just have to pay the principal, but you don't pay the 20%. But the point of the Gemara is that, again, if you steal a bunch of grapes, a bunch of dates that would sell as a bunch for $49, even though there's 50 dates there, you would sell it for $49. But if you would sell each one individually, you would sell it for $1 a piece. So if you steal from a plain person, you have to pay him $49. But if you steal from Hegdish, you would have to actually pay $50 back to Hegdish. So we see that Hegdish is more stricter than a Hedyot. So Baskifla Rabbi Barabaya, so Rabbi asked the question to Hedyot Amay Mashal Chamishim Nichichada. Why for a plain person would you have to sell it for 49? Namely, I know let the guy that you stole from said, I wanted to sell each date individually, and you're causing me a loss. Why should I only accept 49 from you? We find that by Hegdish, by a plain person, we go easy to make the on a gazlan. We don't want to make it so strict. Just like if you damage a row of tvua in a big row, in a big field, you don't assess the damage just on that row itself. You zoom out and say how much of this field is lost by having this row damaged. And of course, it's less than if you just assess the row by itself. So same thing over here. You give the gazlan an easier way to pay a discounted rate back to the nigzal. So it must be that Shmuel holds that Hedyot is more lighter than stealing from Hegdish. How could that be? Well, now we learned in the Mishnah, if the treasurer of Hegdish says, not the Ivan Oikara Hegdish, if he takes a stone or beam that belonging to Hegdish, loimol, he didn't do an Avera. Nosna lechavera, but if the treasurer took the stone or the beam and gave it to his friend, who ma'al, he made an avera. The chavera le'ma'al, his friend didn't do anything wrong, because you're not supposed to take something belonging to the hegdish and give it to your friend. Here, you can have it. Let's say he built the beam into his house. Loy ma'al, he didn't do an avera until he stays under the beam for a few seconds, and he had a benefit of a penny's worth, a pruta's worth. But just by putting it into your house, you didn't make anything happen to hegdish. It's the same beam. You have to benefit from hegdish, and only then, if he benefited from it by staying under the beam, then he's violated. So he violated hegdish. So if Yosef Rabba Kamed Rabbi Yochanan Yosef Kamish Made Shmuel Zoyse Meres, from the hegdish you could extend the halacha of hegdish to a regular person. Hadar b'chatzar chavei l'shleim b'datei tzaros la'alach zoyis chachar. Let's say your friend has a courtyard. He never uses it. It's abandoned. He never rents it out. It's just a free property upstate, and somebody squats there without the knowledge of the owner. You have to pay. You have to pay the owner, because just like you see by hegdish had no idea it's being violated, and Hegdish didn't lose anything. You put a beam onto your roof, you can just take it off, right? And yet you see that you did an avera, so you would have to pay back Hegdish. So over here, that if you go and live in your upstate friend's courtyard, and he wasn't going to plan and rent it out, and he didn't know about it, you still have to make a rental payment to him. So we equate Hegdish to Hedyot. So therefore, how could you say that Hegdish is always stricter than Hedyot? And in this scenario, we're saying that Hegdish is less than Hegdish is equal to Hedyot, to a regular person. So the Gemara says, Shmuel regretted and changed his mind, and said that Hedyot, if you sleep by Hedyot, by the upstate with Shloimeh Data in Chatzar Chaver Shloimeh Data, you don't have to pay him. Maybe he had regrets from what we're talking about the date situation, paying 49 versus 50. Maybe that he had regrets, and this he kept. Loy. He regretted saying this idea that if you stay in your friend's courtyard and he doesn't know about it, you have to pay him. The Rava said, Hegdish loy medas keheditz medas dami. Wow. Hegdish, there's no such a thing. Hashem doesn't know that you're violating his hegdish. If you put the beam into your house, Hashem knows you put the beam into your house. So only by hegdish you have to pay such a situation. But if you go stay in your chatzar chaveroi, in the courtyard of a friend, and he doesn't know about it, he'll never know about it. So why should you have to pay him a rental fee? So Shmuel took back what he said. Amar Rava, will finish off over here, half a minute. Amar Rava said, new thing. Hani shekloi de tavre chavisi de chamri lechemri. There were carriers of barrels, let's say of wine. They were supposed to bring it into a store. Biyoyme de shuka. Now, and they broke the barrels. They were sloppy, and the movers broke the barrels, and the wine spilled all over the place. So beyond the shuka, the barrel of wine would sell on a market day. You would get 5 zuzim for the barrel. But a regular day, then the value of the barrel is only 4 zuzim. So what should these carriers pay the owner of the store? So the Gemara says, if they returned it to him before the day of the marketplace, so then they have to give him just a plain barrel of wine at 4 zuzim, because it's before the marketplace. He can actually just turn it around and sell it for 5, so it's not a big deal. So just pay 4, and he could buy a new barrel of wine and resell that for 5. But if let's say it's after the market day, so then they have to give him 5 zuz. Why? Because he could have said, if I would have had my barrel of wine for the market day, I could have made a profit on it. You prevented me from making the profit, so now you have to make up that difference. So you have to pay me a barrel worth 5, or you pay me 5 zuzim. V'loy amran, and this is finally the Gemara says, Elud loy havlei chamel zabune. It's talking about a store owner who did not have any wine to sell. But if he had wine to sell in the marketplace and did not sell that wine in the marketplace, so it's obviously he was never going to sell his wine. So he can't say, oh, you caused me a loss because I could have resold it. You had wine, other wine, and you didn't sell it. So this wine you wouldn't have been able to sell as well either. So therefore they would pay him 4 zuz. And even when they pay him back 5, they have to, you don't pay him full 5. They have to deduct from, first of all, the tircha of putting it out, the bother of putting the barrels of wine out there, and also to making a spout hole of it so that the wine could pour out, so you can resell it, or people could come there and smell the wine. So those are items that you need to do when you're putting out stuff for sale. They can deduct that from the money that they owe to the store owner. Okay, we'll stop over here.